Okay, recording in
Good,
process.
good.
Proceed.
So I want to welcome you all to the April 19th edition of the CTE Revitalization Advisory Committee meeting. As promised before, we wanted to spend some time talking about what things look like to date, as well as poking around inside those important topics that we need to be looking at for down the road, including but not limited to talking about guidelines and parameters and ideas around the next RFA. We still do not know what the funding situation for Revite is, but we are somewhat encouraged by the fact that this program has been well received over the years and continues to be supported. We will know by the end of the session how many dollars we have to play with. Looking ahead to that period of time, we'll also want to be looking at the possibility of having a meeting in the summer or somewhere around that area, depending on what people's availability would be, to continue carrying on some of the work around the RFA. We'll know how many dollars we have to be invested in Revite and what it may look like for the coming year. And we will also be introducing at least one, possibly two more members of the advisory committee family, one of them being Ryan Tribbett, who has a CTE trades and labor background and an ag background, and is with PacWest Lobby Group. I had a nice conversation with him fairly well earlier today, and he is extremely excited. If he could jump in the car and show up today, he would. Very, very eager, very excited to be part of the work, and with some really good background and experience that would make him an excellent fit. And he was a Tom Spoo find. And fun fact, Ryan Tribbett and Brian Krieg do a lot of the same work and have a lot of connections. One of them is involved in trades in one part of basically the outside of the structure, and the other one is involved with trades related to the inside of the structure. So they have a lot of stuff going on there that's good, and have known each other for quite a while. So I see that as being a value add. So with that, again, welcome you all. Linda has provided us with an agenda to guide us, and so I think we're going to go ahead, and I'll kick it back over to her. She'll talk about public comment, and then followed on with the status and reporting. So take it away, Linda. And of course, we're small and informal, so pretty much questions anytime. And if it's something that looks like we need to go down a rabbit hole, we may decide to sequester off some time to discuss items, or we may just set up a separate meeting. We will be meeting sometime in the next several months, so I don't want it to wait that long, but there are things that we can always move into another meeting. So this time for real, take it away, Linda.
I paused. Oh, thank you, Dan, and good afternoon, everybody. Yeah, for reading of public comments, well, as of a couple of minutes ago, we had received no public comment to share, but for the record, as is our practice, we do place a notice on the CTE Revite Grant webpage about 30 days before the meeting, inviting public comment and providing an email address. But again, no public comment received this time. And as far as the next item, our current status and reporting, I'm showing the response levels from the 4 updates just for comparison purposes. And the most recent update number 4 was due back in at the end of March. We've got 89% response to that. Technically that's 47 out of 53. It's lower than we like, lower than we need, but we haven't given up on that. We still have a few strategies to follow up with the 6 missing grants, not only to make sure that they are complying with their requirement to submit on a mostly timely basis those reports, but also just to make sure that they are doing well. So it's at least a twofold process. From the updates that we did receive, in those updates, they do a self-assessment every time of how far they are considering themselves along in their project. So it looks pretty good, actually. 53% of the grants are showing that they're 76 to 100% complete, and 78% are at least halfway there. And for those that are on the lower end of that, we've talked to a lot of them about some of the common issues, which kind of dovetails into the next bullet point about the challenges and the barriers that are reported to us. And the ones that I'm showing here, it's like I just kind of keep copying and pasting them from one agenda to the next, because it's the same kind of the usual suspects. The construction costs and delays and vehicle delays and costs are probably the thorniest issues we run into, or that the recipients run into. There are also a number of changes in grant personnel and budget realignments, small to medium. There are probably more instances of that, but they tend to be a lot easier to resolve. So that's kind of steady as she goes. And we do have one more update that will be going out. It's not one of the standard ones. This is the big one. This is the final that goes into a lot more depth and breadth, asks a lot more questions, more information on students participating, some student demographics. Also, we want to know a little bit more about the results of their partnerships and kind of nuts and bolts, how well they feel they met their deliverables and their intended outcomes. And so that will be going out. Usually we send that out late May, early June. It's not due until September 15th, but we want to give them a little preview of what they might be working on during the summer or in those few days before the end of school or when they come back. And so that'll be going out. And that's about it for reporting. Does anybody have any questions or concerns? Okay. All right.
Thank you very much, Linda, for that. And as Linda has already pointed out, those 4 bullets under challenges will constitute a fertile ground for us to have some conversations and field from you some recommendations and thoughts around how to address some of these things. We've gone everywhere on construction costs, from we don't want people building stuff to we need to have a really tight sieve around what they're doing and how they're doing it, so that we're setting them up for success. They're setting themselves up for success, or we're helping them do that, or something like that. And then also things with wheels and the impact that supply chain and so forth can have on those things happening the way that they should. Change in grant personnel, that just happens. We've had everything from changes in CTE teachers on up to changes in superintendents who just happen to hold the keys to all of the information about the grant. And that made things a little interesting, but we were usually able to plumb those back together. And budget realignments are almost constant, and for the most part, they're some of the easiest to address, because if programs stay within the parameters of the grant, they're really just notifying, and we're making sure that there's a paper trail and audit trail created through the exchange of emails and the explaining of what the intent and the need is, so that they have a resource and we have a resource. And as we like to think, no one has a boss who gets surprised, which is always important. So, supplemental grant funding. This has been an interesting topic, and one that we didn't necessarily figure we were going to get into this year. but it is one of those situations that kind of found us. And the first one was, of course, Marshall High School, Ben Lapine School District. They have been joined by Klamath, who had a very, justifiable and modest request to add in. Marcola and Bethel both had numbers that made sense. I think there might be a double count in here. Nope, I think there's a double count, but I'll check on that in a second. You'll note St. Paul School District is listed as an in progress, and St. Paul came up as a result of one of the periodic reports. And essentially their language was a little loose and a little vague, and I'm not being judgmental on that. I'm just saying it was a little bit vague, but we were directed to please pay attention to things that alluded to that situation, and or alluded to people being short of money, and then investigate. And we did, in fact, investigate. And St. Paul's situation is rather interesting. And it's a word that we use a lot, actually. And their need was profound. They're redoing a building, and their initial response when we said, "What is your need, and why did you indicate as you did during the reporting phase?" They need to finish a building, and basically, after I said how much, they said 1.2 million. I said, we don't have that. So they did take a look at where they were with the project, and they found smaller items that would help them complete a significant part of the work that they have been able to carry on and they would be able to carry out. And that essentially was in their horticulture facility, being able to build out potting tables, irrigation, that sort of thing, which was just settled, in fact, during a conversation, or was just put on the table as a topic of conversation at Oregon ACTE in one of those side hall conversations. And that's the sum of about $7,000 to $8,000. So it is, as far as we can tell, based on our numbers, it is within tolerances for where we usually end up with the grant. What I would like to propose is that we go ahead and do this. We've not given them the green light because we want to have conversations about these things. I would also like to suggest that we talk about working together to restructure some of the questions and some of the processes that we use for reporting, for periodic reporting, and maybe giving individual programs the opportunity to be very clear and very affirmative about saying, ODE, we're asking you for money directly from CTE revitalization offers, as opposed to we're short of money and we're looking for money. Those are two radically different things. And rather than be in a position of starting a conversation, which I think in some cases can just trigger an ask that maybe was not intended, that we have a better, more thought through process. And maybe what we need to do, if there is going to be a future movement in the direction of supplementing grants, maybe we just need a bona fide process, and we don't have that right now. So I'm going to stop there for a second and get your responses, thoughts, etc. on this, and we'll probably continue this conversation and into the summer as well.
So which question do you want to address first, St. Paul or the process or
Let's
what?
go ahead and talk about St. Paul first, and we'll just kind of get that one cleared away. Then I think we need to talk about process and where people's comfort level is with
Well,
such.
I don't know what the 25,000 was for Marcola. That's a small school district as well. St. Paul's a small school district. And so if they're asking for 7 to 8, Marcola got 25 for something, and I don't know how we can not justify doing the 7 or 8.
Mhm.
And I would suggest probably something on the 8 end because of how things continue to escalate in cost.
Well, and Glide would be small too, so that would be kind of comparable.
Yeah,
What's that,
Glide was the completion of a fence, and Plymouth City was
I think that was that training?
Yeah, it was professional development and training on software packages that they needed to do their work. Marcola's went to, you think I'd have my notes right here. Let me try to find them. Actually, I think I can remember it. Marcola's was additional work being done on their facility to work toward making it operable as a food processing area. And their actual, Marcola's ask was 142. And that wasn't going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
So looking at the fact that Ben Lapine and Bethel had some profound needs, and that was partially done. And Ben Lapine sort of set the pace for the way that these things have rolled out, but it also, rolled out in real time. They were bigger asks, but they were also asks that were not possible. They were able to identify things that they needed, and then we were able to either say, well, this will take care of that, or this will contribute to the development of the program. And then St. Paul simply decided, this is something we need. This is something that will make the facility useful.
Well, $8,000 is a far cry from 1.2 million. So I guess I'm curious how they made that work.
Well, I'll take you through the process. After I said 1.2 million is not going to work because there's no way that we have that much money, the conversation turned to small things that could be done that would make a maximal impact on the student experience and help the learning happen. And at that point, we left the telephone conversation, and we, in fact, agreed to meet at Oregon ACTE. And they said, please bring your ideas and we'll sit down and let's just talk about it and have a conversation with what you think will be of value to you, since we can't help you put up a building. How can we help the students? And that was pretty much the sum and substance of it. In order to make the horticulture buildings actually work so that the students are learning what they needed to learn and they're able to do what they need to do, these were the enhancements they needed. And they still have to figure out how to work on the rest of it. And the principal superintendent actually shared on the initial call that in all likelihood, they're going to have to probably do a 20 to 25-year loan. They've already bonded. They're not likely to go out for another bond fairly recently. They're not likely to go out for another bond for some time. So they're looking at going to the credit markets and looking for loan money.
So if you look at all of your supplementals, you got about $90,000. How big is that supplemental pot?
What we usually end up having left over after all is said and done can vary from maybe 250 to 400,000.
But what happens to the rest of that money?
The rest of that money gets reverted, I believe, to the legislature, since it's not ours.
Yeah.
We don't want to do that.
No, you
No,
want to
we
use
don't.
everything you can.
We don't, which is why I think
Yeah.
we need to have a plan A, B, and C for doing this. And then maybe we don't have that problem. We did last biennium, I think it was last biennium, when we did the small schools grants, we actually did what I like to call a Series B round.
29,000.
Yeah.
And we went back and that was pretty successful because people found there was work left undone and they needed a little bit more cash to do that. So that
Yeah.
worked out really well. And then a number of years ago, I know that there was the grant got reopened after the first year because there was more money that popped up. And it could have been a kicker thing or something. I'm not really sure what caused it, but there was more money. And then but that's been quite a few years since that happened.
Mhm.
I guess I'm concerned that the legislature can look at that and say, well, you didn't use all the funds we gave you and then cut us back. I'm a little concerned about the precedent there.
I
I don't
share
want to
that
give them back
concern,
our
Jerry.
money.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think
And-
you're right. I've worked with grants where, yeah, if you gave anything back, you never saw it again.
Mhm. Yeah, we get this for the Career and Technical Student Foundation, Student Leadership Foundation, the mouthful foundation. We get like chapter grant money that goes to individual schools. And what we do is we allocate like in the first year, and then we go through and we allocate again. We've structured it slightly different. So we've already used our money. But when we've given it out as a grant where you're coming and requesting a certain amount, or if we've allotted so much for new chapters, for example, if at the end, if we would have hit like March and knew we were going to have X amount left, we actually went back one year and went to each of the CTSOs and said, what do you need? You have $1,000. Tell us what you need. And we used up the rest of the funds. So, it's like I think it's in the case of, if at this point, you recognized, and it may be too early to tell that, we're going to have $100,000 left. Then it's kind of one of those, okay, folks, we got $100,000. You each can have up to X. What do you need? And to try to distribute it fairly and evenly on the extra money. So, because you definitely want to use everything we can, because just like we've all said, we don't want it to go away.
Exactly.
Sounds like we may have as much as 300,000 to 400,000. If I heard that correctly.
You heard correctly, and the pattern, we actually had staff run numbers about utilization and about reimbursement and so forth, and it's been around that for, gosh, well, two biennia, this one and the previous one. And the previous one was an anomaly because of COVID, and there were a bunch of programs who thought they were going to do things and then ended up not being able to do much of anything. One who asked for 125 or 150, and they ended up using 27,000, and that's all that they could do because they didn't have staff, they didn't have students in learning spaces, and so yeah, that caused a lot of disruption. If we can, kind of riffing off Lori's idea and come up with an approach like that is baked into the system, then it would be easier as we roll into a new iteration to say, and we're going to do a reallocation of any remaining funds at thus and such a point to make sure that people can clean up things that they need to finish up. And move on down the road from there. And just build that right in, because that's something that has not been previously built in.
Mhm. Yeah, and obviously if somebody's fully completed and doesn't need anything, because you could have 3 or 4 that don't, like they're like, we're done, we're good, and then just reallocate across those that do.
Mhm.
So Dan, what about the possibility, given what you said about St. Paul and they're trying to figure out ways to fund the completion of their program, would it be possible for us to consider giving them 25, just like several of the others, since that seems to be the max? So they can get a few more things along the way without having to take out as much of a loan. It doesn't help much, but it helps some.
Mhm.
Is that a possibility?
I think anything's on the table. Obviously, we'd want to, run it through Janelle's sieve to make sure that it hits all the right notes. Her interest is in making sure that we have the ability to help as many as possible. And it doesn't do any good if we just have the money sitting around. So I think it's definitely worth looking into and changing that number. And
Well, we're running out of time. They've got 2 months
Mhm.
before it has to be spent.
then it would simply be a matter of how quickly can it come out of EGMS.
And that's another story.
Well, yes. I feel like they're getting better traction as the process has improved, but I can't necessarily attest right now to the fact that they could, turn it on a dime and push it out in a huge rush. But we can talk with them and we can find out where they are and how they're doing.
Dan, in the past, when you reallocated some of that money to the programs, I imagine there needs to be some sort of a notification process to all of the participants. Is that right? So everybody has the opportunity, fair and equal opportunity to acquire more funding if they need it.
Yeah, in past years, that's the way it was done.
So that's going to take quite a bit of time, right, to get that out.
Well, it can be done. A lot of it, I think, Bridget, is the response time on the other end and what people's capacity, hi Tom, what people's capacity is for responding, since people are in the middle of a lot of stuff right now. And
Yeah.
they're past integrated, most of the integrated guidance work that they've been asked to build and comment on, although some of the districts are rebuilding their grant submissions or their plan submissions for that. So they're busy with that. And they're also getting into near end of year things that Jerry and Tom could tell you all sorts of stories about that need to be done.
Is there a way we can simplify the process as much as possible so that they can apply for these funds and provide whatever documentation we would want to see from them so that it isn't a huge burden to them and we can spend the rest of this money and not send it back?
We can certainly design it to be as streamlined as possible. And we did that in the previous biennium when the application was barely a page and made it, as simple as humanly possible. Just to see what we can get out there. The thing that we don't know, and it all all of this really hinges on individual programs getting their work done. Because when we turned this grant on the world and people applied and their submissions were approved, there was an assumption that they would, and this is where it gets complicated with reimbursement grants, that they would, over the course of the year, ask for their money. Now, we have a lot of programs who have submitted reimbursement requests. We have a lot who haven't, and we have some programs who haven't spent any money at all.
Wow.
So the thing that we are dealing with, which is a little crazy making, is that they could all wait until the 27th of June and submit their paperwork, or anything less than the total number of recipients could finish submitting their paperwork. By doing the periodic updates, by doing monthly office hours, by trying to make ourselves sort of obvious and up in people's faces, and then starting first part of April, wasn't it, Linda, when you sent out the first prodding letter?
Oh, for spending deadline? I was actually March. And we're doing
Okay.
it just about once a month now to remind them that 6:30 is the spending deadline.
And that goes to the grant people, the fiscals, kind of spreads it around so that the people who touch the grant know what are reminded constantly what the deadline is, and will hopefully bump into each other and say, hey, we got to step this up. We got to get going, because things are not. And we recognize that people are busy. There's a lot going on in the schools, and many of the schools are small and they just don't have capacity. So if they know and they can think about it and they can prioritize it, they're more likely to get it done. And we committed to doing that. We did that in the last grant cycle, the last biennium. That worked really well. And then as Linda pointed out, we started in March doing that, and we'll do that on a monthly basis. And I believe there's also a 2 weeks to go email that we send out halfway through June that says, the whole thing is just about over. You need to do things. So it's less a case of we didn't have a way to allocate the money, and more of a case that people are having difficulty getting it spent so they can ask for reimbursement. So that makes the system somewhat imperfect.
Yeah. That's too bad.
What are the OIR? Is the money directed by OAR? Any administrative rules that tell us how it has to be spent?
That's an interesting question. My recollection, let me see if I can find the OIR real quick, is that it's not that prescriptive. The RFA dictates how the money is to be spent, how it's to be allocated, or how it's to be delivered to people.
Right, and it's got like the rural versus urban.
So we had the percentages, and that all got
Right.
figured into the equation when we did the grants and accepted the applications.
Yeah, because I don't remember from way back when. It's like, it seems like, I don't think there were certain like areas, there were a couple things that were restricted, but I forget what those were, but it It was things you would expect to be restricted, I guess.
Yeah, it was definitely urban versus rural. And let's see if I can find the RFA real quick here.
And then we set parameters around that, if I remember right, from going back like 10 years or something, which we may have changed along the way.
Yeah, I don't think there's been a profound amount of change in that area. The big variable that seems to pop up is it seems to be a capacity issue where the programs don't have the capacity to plan and spend. Where they make, and we've heard about, and we brought this to you before, we're having a terrible time with the county engineer, we're having a terrible time with the planning department, and people getting rezoned in the middle of their projects and things of that nature.
Yeah.
Which adds to the variability and the confusion. And we're also sitting on that edge of, we don't want to reallocate money and hand it out if someone is going to, on the 27th of June or even on the 30th of June, decide they're going to turn in all of their reimbursement requests for a whole 125, or in the case of a consortium, 250K, and then we find ourselves in an interesting position where we've given away money twice.
Yeah.
We had some level of safety with the ones that we've already approved, around 80 some $1,000, because that was one grant that default is not the word. I'm not sure what the right word is, but it's just,
they just stopped.
Right. So we knew
Yeah.
that money was coming back. Beyond that, again, it's just like, we don't know. We don't know really until, midnight, June 30th, how much money would actually be left over that could go to other grants.
Yeah.
We can speculate based on past performance, but that's a little iffy.
Yeah.
All those financial services ads on the news, on the television, tell us not to do that. So I think they are probably maybe speaking from experience, who knows? But in all seriousness, it's a weird sort of situation to be sitting in.
Yeah.
And by the time we find out if people are actually going to, almost used an indelicate term, which I won't use, make that decision, it's really too late to do anything. And yeah, so that in part is why I led with the idea that maybe we need to think about how we would build a mechanism that would make this possible, and how we would build in sideboards. And some have offered in the past that maybe taking some of the wildly difficult portions out of the program, or some of the spending categories or spending options out of the program, while it would make things easier, but sometimes those are the only way that some programs can get things like smaller structures, remodels, or vehicles.
Yeah.
So there's an equity argument that's been offered up that they can't really compete, and therefore the learners can't be competitive because they don't get a shot at having some of the same sorts of structures that other programs do. So unless we really beef up the ability to offer flexible learning approaches and course sharing and program sharing and so forth, which I think is that's in part of the long game. That's not something we can do short term. there are questions, comments, ideas? I think we definitely want to carry through and continue talking about this because we have to kind of get this fixed to our satisfaction before we do this again. But anything else we can talk about right now?
Do you need a motion or approval for those supplemental grants? Supplemental.
Let's go ahead and get it so that we're on paper with it.
Mhm.
Can we raise St. Paul to 25?
I don't have a problem with
Up to.
up to language probably would work best, and then I need to check and make sure that there's a comfort level that we can go in that direction, and then I can report back. I know that that's kind of backwards, but
Yeah. I mean, it covers us for like, we've approved up to 25,
okay.
knowing that maybe they won't have anything that they can, you know, if they're finding things that would be beneficial, maybe they've now thought of something else because they can't do A. So what other B function can we offer you or that will help the program?
Mhm.
So
Yeah,
I move that
I would be fine with it.
I move that we approve the additional funding that has been allocated to Marshall High School, Ben Lapine, Klamath, Marcola, Glide, and Bethel, and that up to 25,000 can be approved and awarded for St. Paul School District.
A second.
Bridget was first.
Well, I can officiate and say all in favor.
All right.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions?
Me, I don't know what's going on.
We'll get you-
Apologies.
We'll get you a link. It's good to see you. We are just talking about we're in the agenda. We were talking about supplemental grant funding. Summing up, and please anybody chime in and supplement what I'm saying. Discuss the fact that we had several schools being supplemented who had expressed a need and a desire for additional funding.
Sounds like the motion carried.
I'm sorry?
Motion carried. I got in. Thank you.
She's
good?
caught up to speed and we're ready. Oh.
One part, the robust part of the conversation that you didn't get in on is us talking about, as we work forward, taking a serious look at how we would handle supplementation, because it was sort of herky-jerky this time. Well, it's beyond sort of herky-jerky. And the other thing is that we deal with a certain amount of uncertainty anytime we do this because of the reimbursement state of the grant. I reflected on the fact that while we have some programs that are finished and some programs that are doing a good job of asking for reimbursements, we have some programs that don't have not requested much in reimbursement, and we actually have some programs that haven't requested any reimbursement at all. And yes, it is half past April, so one has to wonder, you know, what's going to happen. In the previous biennium, we had about 400K left over after all was said and done, and that was primarily a function of the impact of COVID and the fires, which made it hard for programs to do anything, and so they had no money to ask for. And the last item on the list, which we had not discussed because St. Paul was late to the program, responded to an email that we put out to them when they indicated an interest in talking about this. Their original ask was 1.2 million. We didn't have that. So they needed work done in their horticulture building to help support the programming there. And they were asking essentially for 7 to 8. Jerry held as much as we should approve to up to 25 in case there's additional need. Everyone agreed, and so that's been approved.
They asked for more than $1 million? Wow.
They asked for 1.2 to finish a building. Marcola's original ask was 242, and that went down to 142, and they got 25. Another one was big. I think Ben Lapine was in the 40s, and it settled out down there.
Right.
But
Let's
again,
expect great things of these schools.
Well, yes. Given the potential for investing in something that's really exciting and high quality, yeah. And we'll talk a little bit about that in learning walks here in a moment. But that's kind of the gist of what you missed out on. And then you can see in the document the status reports on the reporting, give an idea where people are, and then the pace that they're making.
Contract.
Yeah. The usual suspects, construction, vehicles are the biggest stumbling blocks, and lots of budget realignments. I have one sitting in my inbox I need to deal with this afternoon. That's a real easy one, because they want to move it from here a quarter of an inch to the left and put it here. It's the same program. It's just a slightly different way of addressing getting it done. So those are easy.
Okay. I apologize for my lateness. Grant High School I was hosting them and their bus didn't come, so I couldn't leave them alone. So I apologize, but I'm here now.
That's okay. That's awesome.
And thank you for helping the generals. Other questions about funding? I do want us to have a further conversation about this when we have our next meeting, and we'll set out some sideboards to keep us from getting too far out into the pucker brush. But I think we do need to come up with something that's an acceptable way of dealing with supplements that'll fit inside of the grant structure and make sure that we're using all the money. One of the things that you may not have heard, Meg, was that there are concerns that we're not using all of our money, and that eventually the legislature is going to get cranky about that. And then, yes, exactly. So, which we don't want. So there you have it. Anything else on this?
Dan, I have one suggestion. I know I'm not part of the committee, so this is not an official, hey, let's think about this, but I just had a little minor brainstorm, and I thought, well, since this is being recorded, at least I won't forget it if it turns out that it might be something that we could build on for next, sure, assuming there is a next iteration of Revite. If we did something like, okay, they still have till June 30th to spend. However, maybe we could build something into the RFA which says you have until June 30th to spend, but any funds that have not been claimed by, say, April 1st are subject to reallocation. So I don't know if that's fair. I don't know if that's a thing we could even do, but it would be one way to entice or entice people to spend it or to claim it. And it would, I think it would help. It would inform us better as to how much money we're actually dealing with. So just as, again, we don't even need to discuss that now, but it's just, I thought it could work. It could help for next time.
I saw, thank you very much for that. I saw at least 2 head nods. And I don't know if the people who own those heads want to go ahead and share thoughts. You're on, Tom.
Oh, thank you. I'm sorry I came in late dealing with the kids situation, but I it's no different than what I do with my building budget. So ironically enough, we just shut down from the district level, building budgets are now shut down unless it's encumbered. which means if it's encumbered in a PO, meaning that, you know, the welding shop, math teacher, whatever, so those consumables, they can still go buy those things up to the end of the year. But what it does, it helps me now truly see the dollars that are left. And what do I do with those dollars? I use those leftover dollars now that I can truly see what's not encumbered, and I use that to right size programs, i.e. I use it to right size our band program, because prior to me coming back to Hermiston High School, that just happened to be a program where new equipment wasn't being bought for probably way over a decade. So, and band equipment is unbelievably expensive. So I use those monies over a period of the last 6 years and large chunks of money to right size the band program, doing some similar things with science, and do some things with PE health. So I think it's a great idea. It makes people really start thinking, oh, I've got to stay on top of this, or get someone who knows how to stay on top of it, engaged in that process. So I think it's a great idea.
Yeah, I do too. I mean, I think we need to put something in place where we don't end up in this predicament again, because that's an awful lot of money to leave on the table.
Other thoughts?
Yeah, I've certainly been part of grants that had deadlines for filing. It's like, you know, your first quarter expenses had to be submitted within, like, you know, 2 weeks of the beginning of the next quarter. And that, yeah, you don't want to hit the end of the grant cycle and be surprised that either you don't have anything to finish your project, or you have so much left that you're going to have to give it back.
Mhm.
And to add to that, the other part about that is if I truly am spending my money in a timely manner and correctly, but hey, bids came in well, I didn't need to spend it all. What a good time to let people know, hey, I don't need this money. I don't need 25 grand out of 125,000. Let's get it sent to someone who, or some organ or school that maybe can use it. Right?
Yeah.
Use it in a positive way too. It's not all negative.
Good. Yeah, I think this is a very productive direction to take, and like Linda, I definitely have a dog in the fight, but I don't necessarily have, you know, the voting capacity here. But I think one thing that it does is also encourages people to be planful and realistic about what they're trying to do, and really go down the rabbit hole and try to make sure that they are as ready to do things as they possibly can. Because as you'll recall, we had some people come to the table with some grant application ideas that I don't think they had thought beyond, this is a great idea, let's do it. And they were turning it into a reality, and in a number of cases that reality never became reality. So this probably would be helpful. And we can do that. That can be part of the rewrite into the RFA. And that can help us determine how we would go about doing the reallocation. Because if we have that trigger point that we can use to move us to our plan B or whatever, then that sounds very exciting in terms of setting us up to give people more opportunity. So appreciate your thinking on that. It does help. Expect to see this come back again.
Yeah.
Doesn't help us with our current problem, but it's good for the future.
Yeah, I would agree. And if we had this trigger, we would know exactly how big our current problem is. But since we don't have the trigger, we're essentially poking around in a dark room.
But we have rules. If you didn't spend all your money last time, we're not giving you any money in the future. Like you don't know how to manage a grant. All right.
Mhm.
That has been suggested by others as a way of addressing some of the approaches.
Give someone else a chance for a change.
Yeah. Give somebody else a chance. And also, if you're going to get in the pool, please be realistic about your ability to function as a grantee.
Yeah.
This is, however, tons better than clawing back money that people don't use. That, I think, is arguably worse, but this is still doesn't feel good.
So is this one of the points of the learning walks that are coming up, like to determine if there'll be a balance or will they spend it all out? Is that one of the reasons for a learning walk?
The purposes of the learning walks, thank you for the transition, and no, we did not pre-plan that.
Oh.
Is that we really want to harvest artifacts. We want to learn what people are doing. We want to see what Donna Brandt and Tom Thompson used to refer to as bright spots, and trying to highlight the good things that are being done. Now, we have a limited amount of time. We have a limited amount of people. We also ran into a situation where a concept called integrated guidance became an important thing for us to do this spring, which really clamped down a lot on people's flexibility to go out and visit. We do, however, have a couple of ideas. There are some programs that we would like to see, and some ways of getting out to see them. You know, those of us who are here, perhaps having conversations with Jerry and other regional coordinators who visit programs just in the matter of being in the field and might be interested in and have the bandwidth to take a look at what schools are doing. Another approach that we've talked about encompasses everything from write-ups to having individuals simply grab their smarty phones, walk through the learning spaces, and capture information that they can share with us about how they've expanded their programs. We, of course, would need to do permission slips should anyone of a particular age or disposition be captured on the video so that we could use them. But we really want to be in a position where we're able to say to electeds, to administrators, to whomever, that this does good work, this does good things, and this is an example of the types of impact that the grants are having. We have a triage list, some that we definitely want to take a look at, which would encompass some of the programs that maybe had trouble getting rolling or have had issues with supply chains and so forth. We have others that are, geographically convenient that we can get to, and then certainly anybody would have the option or the opportunity to do the video. But that's something that we could probably do pretty easily. We could get a goodly amount of useful information about how people are doing, and not necessarily have to put someone in every one of the 51 remaining grants around the state, just simply because there probably would not have been enough time if we'd started in November. I know there's not enough time now.
Like we're asking for a book report.
In a manner of speaking, the video book report or the blurb with some pictures on up to, we'll stop by for a couple of hours and you can run us around and show us what's cool. Maybe we talk to a few students.
All right. Have you picked the schools that you're going to visit?
There is a list.
On the list.
And do you perchance have our guiding document, Linda? I'm just going to pick. She's working on it.
I found it. I'm going to give permissions and drop the link in the chat in just a minute or two.
But there are some actually really interesting ones going on. There's live broadcasting grant going on in Klamath, for which they got a supplementation, and the grant that is rolling out over in Jefferson County, Warm Springs. That one has a lot of interest attached to it because it involves the tribe. It involves the interaction with the school district, and it could very well lead to developing a businesses within the community. And it's fun to see those sorts of things. The work that they're doing down at Marcola, where they have farm to fork, where they have a strong orientation to natural resources and ag, and have a fairly comprehensive way of doing it. And they're also doing quite a bit with work-based learning that impinges on that program. That would be another one that would be of interest.
The link is now in the chat, and I think it looks like people are able to get in. So if you don't, let me know. But
I think J-Bar-J would be a fun one to do, an interesting one to do, because we don't get a chance to do all programs necessarily that often with the grants. We've had a few, and it can be really gratifying to see the impact that those have. Corbett School District is a good example in that tier one of a program that thought they were going to be able to use a building to relocate their facility. And then they were told, because of a combination of county regulations, and they're right on the edge of the gorge. So everything that they touch there has to be processed through the Gorge Commission. The building that they were going to use, they're not going to be able to use because of bumping into some of the regulations. So they're still kind of circling around trying to figure out what they're going to do, but they have settled in on we have some spaces, some learning spaces within an existing building that we can use, that we're going to spiff up and accessorize. So they've had actually a bit of a time of it. They've probably pivoted 4 or 5 times. And this is a school that traditionally has not had CTE programs. They've had STEM, and they really have wanted to get into the CTE business and have struggled with making that work. But this was, to date, their best chance to do it. They had, programming that would make sense, but their biggest problem has been facilities. Bethel was permits.
Doesn't look good for Baker. Schools like that,
For example, yeah.
0 to 10%.
There was a request to do a shift in some funding that just came in, and since that's yours, Jerry, we need to have a sidebar on that one so that you can see what I see. And I only take that out of this bailiwick because there's other things that need to be discussed.
Okay. So when it says stand down until further notice, what is that?
This was an instruction from an RC because of prevailing situations going on in the school, that there
Wow.
really wasn't any conversation that could be had at the moment.
I see.
What does RC mean?
Regional coordinator,
Okay.
Caitlin. So our preference would be to try to be in place with tier ones, and then to cherry pick some others from the rest of the list that look particularly interesting or intriguing for in person, and to have the rest of them, and conceivably the rest of them, submit either their written book reports or to do their video book report approach. Give us some things that we can appreciate. And we also, as you're already aware, we do bright spot requests every time we do an update. And that in many cases, the district will take advantage of that opportunity to send us pictures or to send us a little quickie video, send us links to articles that appear in the local press. And then many of those find their way into the CTE update that Linda, Art, and I work on. And if you're not getting that, you should get that every month. If you're not getting that, please let us know and we'll make sure that you get on the list. Join the other almost 5,000 people who are enjoying it on a monthly basis.
As I said in the last meeting, Dan, if you need to help with any of these, I mean, I don't see any that in the real near vicinity outside of Baker, but where you need someone such as myself to travel, I can potentially make some of those things happen.
Right on.
I mean, I realized I was in the valley that used to go to the valley, right? So if you need me to help, let me know. I can make it happen.
So anything else we can do on this? We're dangerously close to being on schedule. So if anything else crops up, please feel free to drop something in the chat or go ahead and interrupt, because again, we're a small group, so that, you know, that's not a problem. Advanced planning coming up, the new RFA. So thinking about the revision of construction and vehicle purchases for the future, I believe that we talked about this and Linda circulated an early version of this. So this is, I think, an enhanced draft of this. And if you pop into that link for the draft MOU, you can see the nature of it. And granted, the enforceability of this sort of thing is, well, it makes for a robust conversation. I like to think we can. In a lot of cases, I think there's some limitations there, but if it's being attested to and watched, and people have a really clear understanding of what the needs and parameters are and what's necessary for success, we like to think that shining a light on this sort of thing makes it easier for people to make really strong decisions, understanding that some people will have problems with that.
This probably would need like ODE's legal people to tell you what to put in here, but I think we should have a statement about liability.
Okay.
In terms of that, you know, the district, everybody understands that OD is not responsible, is not liable for anything related to the vehicle or anything that happens as a result of the vehicle use.
Excellent. Good point.
Because you don't want somebody coming back saying, so say the vehicle's in an accident, kids get hurt. You don't want them coming back, the district coming back to ODD saying you paid for this, so now you're liable because our teacher got in an accident with 3 kids.
Exactly. I think it may be possible for people who do such things to repurpose some of the language from the grant agreements, because there's narrowly fairly substantial heavy-duty language in the grant agreements about situations.
So I think that would be a good statement to put in there.
But I think that's a good idea.
Yeah.
I was thinking like a teacher, if there's a CTE teacher related to this purchase, I kind of want their name on there somewhere. Why? Because administrators come and go and teachers stick around. And I trained lots of new CTE teachers. No, you can't give my Chromebook cart to the math department. No, it goes to the CTE teachers. So like things get lost. But teachers who stick around and defend that's the culinary program's bus or whatever it is, you know. Tom, are you laughing at me?
I've been on both sides of that. I just have to chuckle.
Yeah,
because
because meanwhile, some basketball team's bus broke down and they're like, but your bus is just sitting there. We got to get to a game.
it happens all the stinking time. Oh
I
my
know.
God, it's so funny. And I've been the ag teacher that you will not use that vehicle. And then the principal saying, yes, you will. And now the principal saying, oh, we need that vehicle.
If you're not using it.
If you're not using it, you are, and by the way, you are correct, Meg. The ag teacher in me still is there. But there's dire circumstances require people to be creative.
I know there's these opposing forces. So I just want the loyal opposition, the teacher for whom this purchase was made or who advocated for it, to not have to work too hard to keep their access.
In this situation, though, and maybe I'm totally thinking about this wrong. I know with Carl Perkins years ago, when you could use Carl Perkins money for other reasons more than just the PD piece of it. You know, so we purchased the vehicle. I think after a period of, what is it, 5 years? Is that am I saying that right?
I think it's 5 years.
And yeah, so somewhere online it does itself, so to speak, back to just general school district property, so to speak. I think something about that.
I'd have to ask Reynolds or ask Jerry, because Jerry probably knows, but I think it's 5 years, or it's 5 years after the asset. Well, if the program goes away, the asset goes to the regional coordinator.
So if you purchase something with regional dollars, Perkins dollars, it stays within the region. the
That's
consortium.
right.
And so if a district finds that they don't need that, another school within that region has the option of requesting it. If it's
Unless the
purchased
principal
with
hides
Perkins-
it.
Yeah. So if it's purchased with Perkins dollars. Regarding the vehicle, there are several things that need we need to make sure they understand. One is that there's some rules out there, and they better understand what they are when they go to purchase, because certain vehicles that they purchase thinking they can do one thing with, they cannot. Typically, that's the size of a van or something. And then they got to have a type 20 license and all kinds of things that go with it. And so I've had schools in this region, when we did the 1A stuff, purchase vehicles that they found through ODE that they couldn't use the way they intended to use them. So they're going to need to make sure they understand what the rules of the road are, no pun intended. The other thing is I would highly encourage them to make sure that they have had a conversation with their administration about what Meg was talking about, and that is who has priority with this vehicle. When I deal with administrators currently on that very topic, they are all pretty emphatic. It doesn't belong to the ag program, it belongs to the school. Ag program has priority. They get first priority. But also, like Lori said, if that vehicle is sitting there and someone needs it, then, small schools, they don't have all those kinds of things, so they like to use the vehicle. I ended up in a fight between a program that got a vehicle and a principal, and I finally said, I'm out of here. I'm backing out of this bad boy because there's no winning this. And so, and they even went to Reynolds and got him involved to say, tell me how this can be used. What are the rules of the road on this thing? And he said, nah, that's pretty much a no-win. So what I would just tell you is that whatever we put in the grant, they need to make sure they have a conversation with their administrators so they at least are on the same page to start with. I think that's the key. And that might clear up a lot right there.
Good.
But that vehicle is not just going to sit there, I can tell you that. There's too many uses for it. They got to share. They got to play well in the sandbox, typically. And if they're not willing to play in the sandbox, then they might not want to put their money in that.
Good point. There are items here that we want to talk about? In this upper bullet, that is, the MOU bullet. And I believe there was also some conversation that we had before about the needs, and it doesn't show up here because obviously this MOU is a vehicle MOU, but about the needs for being prepared when it's time to deal with construction, renovation, and that sort of thing. And so things like permitting, zoning, bids,
Back up now.
favorite prevailing wage.
You know what's interesting with that, Dan, is that for $125,000, what are you going to build? That's the size of the grants.
It's
You're
a
not gonna
tough
build
shed.
much. You're not going, yeah, I'm going to build a small shed or something. I don't know, but 125 grand doesn't get you much. And a lot of them think they're going to build labs and additional classrooms, and all of this stuff. And it's like, nah, I don't think so. Not anymore, not by today's pricing. It's just not even practical. And so then they're surprised that they can't finish it, and they come back and say, well, we need 1.2 million.
Mhm.
Oh, well, that's a surprise. No, it makes no sense. So I think we can spend a lot of time on it, but I don't know if it's necessary, because the truth of the matter is, when we review those grants, I think we should have a realistic picture about what's reasonable to expect. 125 grand just doesn't build much. Tom knows that probably better than I do. He does a lot of building over there.
So along those lines, and I haven't looked at the application for quite some time, is there anything in there that says that you should have gotten some bids done, and invariably with 120, if it's 125,000, if it is construction, that's going to be a minimum of, or at least you have to have, I think by the rules, 3 bids, correct? If anything over, I think 50,000, the whole prevailing wage thing, you have to have 3 bids, and getting a bid doesn't cost you anything. I met with a contractor today here at Hermiston High School, did some remodeling, and it was a 15, 20-minute conversation, and I'm gonna get a bid next week. And I know I'm in a bigger town, so I understand that, but at the end of the day, there's still construction companies in almost every community. How hard is it to get, and maybe because I'm blessed with some good construction companies, but I don't struggle on the typical construction to get bids. Now, i.e. the bid to redo our lighting and sound for our auditorium. Well, that was a huge struggle because there's only so many companies in the Pacific Northwest that even remotely touch those kind of jobs. So that's taken almost a year to even get the bids in on it. But typical construction, we've been pretty quick turnaround on them. So I don't know, but I'm just asking. That seems to be one of the things that keeps popping up.
To address that question, Tom, when we did the last, the run up to the last round of grants, we did a thing that was fairly constant, whether you were doing construction or vehicle purchase. And that was, if you're considering doing that, you needed to sign up for an appointment. And those individuals had probably a 30-minute to 1 hour conversation with several of us, looking at what at least the thinking was around plan A, plan B, plan C related to this sort of work. And that resulted in some of the vehicle purchases just basically stopping on a dime and not going forward because they realized it wasn't going to work at all. Less so with the construction conversations because everyone figures they've got it nailed and they can make it work. And 75% of the time that of course is a fantasy. So the thinking, and we may have talked about this in another meeting here, or we may have talked about it internally, but there has been a conversation around, well, maybe what they need to do in terms of submitting an application, if they're going to build something or remodel something, is they need to, declare their bona fides. They need to have their information out there on the table so we know that, the plans have been stamped, so that we know that the permits are in place, so that we know these things are happening, rather than it being somebody's best guess of what might work. We didn't go that far, and I think we've kicked ourselves that we didn't. But no, we haven't. It hasn't been that stringent. Now, do we want to do that going forward? It sounds like that might almost be a consideration. And also kind of that cautionary thing that Jerry was talking about, and I'll turn to you, Tom. I don't know what instructional space, how much a square it is. It's probably almost 400 a square. And, if that's the case, 125, you're going to get like a 250 to 300 square foot broom closet. And I would agree. People don't understand the implications.
Yeah, Jerry's right. It doesn't go very far anymore. I mean, the bids we're getting on some of the stuff we're doing here at Hermiston, it blows my mind how much we're going to spend to get very, very little. And so even and I've been involved in some form of construction all my life, but even I'm learning what an eye opener, the cost associated with it, you know. And I don't know that I would push some of these groups to maybe have the permits in place, because that does cost money. But I'm sure at least a bid or some, yeah, you know, they have to have the wherewithal to know they can complete these projects. And I get some of them, it sounds like I said, the one at Corbett. I feel bad for them because maybe that was totally, there's no way to have foreseen some of those things. I get that. But I know with some of the basic construction things, a bid doesn't cost you a dime.
Mhm.
Permitting, that can run into money, but
I would lean towards, should there be funding from the legislature in the next biennium, maybe discouraging applications for new construction. Renovation, remodel, maybe. But if it causes this much conversation for this many months, years for this
Mhm.
group, maybe we avoid it. We know it's probably not going to be a good idea. Dear school, what other ideas do you have? We can't build you a building.
But yet, I I think that's a good point. But yet, we've also had success with grants that have done just that too in the past. Maybe it's just because of you know,
New cost
2018
materials.
versus maybe it's 2018 versus 2023.
Well, you got to remember too, I think, Lori, is that we didn't limit the size of the grants to 125,000 until the last two biennia.
Right. They were
Prior to that, they were 300 to 400,000. The one I wrote for Baker when I was principal there, or director of BTI, was $458,000.
Mhm.
Yeah.
You
That's
could do a lot with $458,000, and that makes sense. Total
Yeah.
renovation of the welding program, but once you drop down to 125, the rules of the road change, and then also that prevailing wage. People, that sneaks up on people,
Mm-hmm.
and they don't know, my gosh, you can't get it at $25 an hour. No, that's a good start. But I don't even know what prevailing wage is anymore, but I know it's awfully high.
Yeah.
And that catches them off guard. So I think there's a big difference. And the reason we're running into some of these issues is because we've seen the size of those grants cut almost in third. I mean, they're cut way back.
Or more. Yeah. Because like one of the first years I was on, we were at 500,000. So that's a much different story. And it was 2016 or something like that too. Obviously costs have risen dramatically.
That's right.
So that makes sense.
But I wouldn't necessarily support the idea of not entertaining it in a grant, because there's only so much you can do with 125 in a program having to buy new equipment or some of those things. You want kids to develop and build products that are a result of what they've been learning. And I think that's critical, and hopefully they can get something out of that. I'd be more in favor of cutting out the vehicle purchases before I would the other one, because the vehicle purchase to me, that I'll tell you, until you've refereed one of those fights, you don't appreciate it near as much. So, but I just think people need to make sure they walk into that with their eyes wide open about what they're getting themselves into. 125 doesn't do much.
so one of my questions is can we entertain increasing that amount back up into that range that it used to be? And then my other thought is, as far as new construction versus remodel, is if we don't feel that they have the scope and the wherewithal to complete the project, I wouldn't want to preclude someone from applying to be creative, to try to enhance their school or school district, but we can always deny the application. So if I put it in, and then we determine through the things that we now know as a group, that they don't have the wherewithal, we can just simply deny it.
Sure.
The other question was, go back to my first question though, is, and I don't remember why we dropped that amount down. Maybe it happened before I got on the board, on this committee. I don't remember now, but do we entertain increasing that amount?
Well, I'll chime in for a second. And some of the institutional history, we had quite a turn in the award size about the time we went into the previous biennium's grants, because we were focusing on small schools, and we unwittingly rolled right into a pandemic that we didn't necessarily expect. That had maybe less to do with it, but the thinking when we started to roll up the small schools idea was that a lot of smaller programs, generally speaking, the more money that was available, this was the thinking. And there's a whole backstory that'll come out when I do my greatest hits video after I retire. But there was the thinking that if you give a medium to larger size school $125,000, they can't do a lot with it but supplement. But for a small program, there's quite a bit you can do. I think experience maybe has indicated that that thinking was flawed, and that the term up to is really handy when having this sort of conversation. And if I apply for a grant and all I need is 125 or 150, well, that's what I apply for. And that's what others have done. If the max of the grant is 400 or 450, I can apply, up to that. Could we figure out a mechanism so that some of the people who didn't need as much could still play in the game? We could entertain that. We could certainly figure it out. And specific to your point, Tom, if we decide, as this advisory group decides, this number needs to be bigger, then you simply say this number needs to be bigger, and then talk about how big. And I don't think that's problematic, because we want it to be useful. And if it's not useful, it's not doing its job anyway.
Right.
Given what you just said, it might be less, there might be less issues if it actually was bigger. Because it almost becomes a tweener grant, if you will.
Mhm.
And so that tweener grant, what I would tell you is this: 53, I think Linda said 53 grants at $125,000. If you had 30 grants at 225,000, or whatever the math comes out to, that might be, given the increase in cost of everything, that might be a more realistic number to deal with. And so maybe it's time for us to reevaluate. Is the 125 causing more issues than it's actually solving? I guess is one way to ask that too. Might be a possibility. I don't think we'll ever get it back up to the 300 to 400, 500,000, whatever it was at one time, because of the cut at the legislative level. But might be something to reevaluate whether or not we want to increase that up to, like you said earlier, up to 250. What does that look like? Somebody do the math, I guess. We're at 53 times 125. What does it look like if you give 30 or 35 out? I don't remember, Dan, how many we used to give out. You'd have the history on that.
Yeah, I could pull that up, but I'm thinking it was in the early days. I think there were like 10 or 12 grants to start out with, and a lot of years we had grants. What was it in the 30s?
Yeah, it was. I think we were, one year it was 38, and that was like the biennium before COVID, or the one before. Because it was like 35, 36, 37. Because I know that was one where we negotiated. We actually went back and like funded 2 smaller schools to get to that number, because we actually like lowered a couple from their max.
Exactly. They had good ideas, but they didn't fit, and so we just shaved.
Yeah, we shaved off some in order to, because we had a couple of smaller schools, small grants.
Mhm.
that it was to try to get that more rural funded, just and improve it. I think it was a situation too where we had maybe another one going back to um, Eugene School District in that area. It may have been one where we'd had a repeat to the same district. And it may have been the year where we had a repeat in, and I know it's not called Eugene, I forget what it's called. But that district,
Virginia.
Bethel, and then also in Salem, I think it was Salem Kaiser that had another duplicate. So we asked them to take some cuts in order to fund a couple more.
I remember that. I think if you stop and think about it, the history tells us that when we made that change a biennium ago to support small schools, 1A schools was really the focus. There are more 1A schools than any other level in the state, any other classification. So that has more schools, something like 87, 88 1A schools. And so I think that's why we lowered it down to about 125, so we could be pretty inclusive of all folks in that. And it didn't get changed the last biennium. We kept it at 125 based on the previous one. And maybe that's why it's that much more important to look at it now. Do we want to keep it there or move it up to see if we can do something a little bit more valid for some schools?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you're still encouraging 1A schools to participate. It
Absolutely.
doesn't have to be a $250,000 grant. There's nothing to preventing them from having a $50,000 grant. I think it was just to, create an opportunity for more grants to come in the pool. Because if you funded three or four or $500,000 grants, then by lowering it, you were able to spread the more money over more schools. So.
And to answer the question, if we had the same pot we do this year, which is 7.321 million, and we did $300,000 grants, it would be about 24 grants, 24 in a skosh.
If you did 300,000, is that what you said?
That is correct.
For 24. So if you went to 250, you could probably get 30 in there.
Yeah, I'll just do this real fast here. Back of them by 250. You could actually get 29 and a quarter grams.
And that's assuming that everyone is 250,000 or
Exactly.
That's right. So you can probably get at least the 30 in.
Worst case is 29.
Mm-hmm.
For everybody.
I'm just throwing out an idea. It's might be time to reevaluate the 125. So
yeah.
Somebody called my name. I don't know.
I did. I might be misremembering something. And Dan, I think Dan, you would be the one to know if I am. Please correct me if I'm wrong. But is there not past a certain point on a grant amount? If we pass a certain threshold, isn't there more lead time required at the RFA stage because it needs DOJ approval? Or am I?
It has to go through for legal sufficiency, which happens as soon as you hit 150.
Okay.
But that could be built into the overall timeline, and then throw in the frustration factor to back it up a little bit further, because it always takes longer than you think it will. We could probably adjust for that and have things come out just about the same, provided we don't get hung up anywhere along the way.
What does that delay? The release of the RFA? Is it the RFA that has to be approved before we could release it to anybody?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure that's the part that has to be approved, because we're going over that magic number. And then if they are, now I'm doubting myself. Yeah, they need to examine the language for each individual grant. So I'm going to say worst case that they would need to look at each one of the grant agreements, but that can be that can be accelerated a bit by having as much standardized language as humanly possible. And giving, because we kind of did that this time, because we had some that went over, the ones that were consortium grants, or 2 or more entities who were not in the same district working together. They had to go through, but we set it up in such a way that the language was as standardized as possible. So all it needed to be examined were any of the, the little anomalies. So we can work with that, and actually it worked pretty smoothly this time. I think we only had 2 calls with DOJ, and it was over and done with. And I think a lot of that was because we had a brand new attorney who hadn't done this sort of work before, and it took a little bit longer. So I don't think we need to avoid going there or doing it, but we do need to be planful if we're going to go over there, that we get all of our business squared away this summer and have conversations before things actually get sent out to anyone about how the things need to be done. Waiting until later in the summer or the fall, I think probably is just going to derail things.
So Dan, when this biennium is up June 30th, when do we begin to get ready for the next biennium? Are we funded by the legislature for that biennium?
We don't know, and usually we don't find out until near the end, because the education budget's one of the last things that gets decided. That's why a lot of schools are waiting around wondering what their support is going to look like. So we probably won't find out. We may get indications into the end of May, but it probably won't be until they gavel a session that we find out exactly what the number is for Revite, assuming there is one, and assuming that they don't decide to recharacterize it, turn it into something different. We can construct a good deal of the RFA, putting in X's for numbers and dummy language for things that we're trying to get squared away. And we don't need to wait until we know exactly what the number is, because you've been very clear about things that you believe are necessary and need to be done. We can work out those pieces and start laying them in. And then we don't necessarily need to cement them in place until we find out that, this is the way we're going to this is the way we're going to lay out the countertop. Then we can cement it in.
And that's my feeling about dealing with DOJ and all those folks. If we got all of our stuff in order on the assumption that we're going to be refunded by the legislature, I assume that that's additional money separate from the 9.9 billion that the governor has set aside for education. Is the Revite part of the 9.9, or is it a separate?
My understanding is it's always been woven into the bigger budget, but it's a part of the bigger budget that just is.
And the 9.9 hasn't changed a lot since her proposal, so it'll be interesting to see. So my point is if we got all of our groundwork done and we're ready to go and we submit it and it gets approved, then we can get that out to schools much quicker. Because part of the issue's been, even though you got 2 years in the biennium, there have been a lot of years where they've got only a year and a quarter to spend it.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And that's where part of that issue is. They run out of time. And so maybe we can plan on the assumption that we're going to have it. Here it is. We agree on these common principles, plug it in.
Yeah, I think that's wise. And then if we have to pivot or do anything unique or unusual, then all we're doing is we're changing this little piece here instead of changing
That's right.
the entire thing, or worst case, having to sit down and write the entire thing in one night, which we don't want to do. And then try to line up the necessary approvals so that it's ready to go. One wild card, we do not know anything about who is going to be sitting in Colt's chair. And depending on when that's decided and the way everything else falls into place, that individual will, or that individual's designees and deputies will have to understand and weigh in on what we're doing, because that's always needed to be approved at the ODE director level before it goes anywhere. But to your point, Jerry, if we're prepared, if we've done our work and we have it in place, then it's simply sitting, quote unquote, on the shelf, ready to grab it and put it into action as soon as we can, as opposed to running around and trying to put it together in a long sleepless weekend. Other thoughts? So I make it 2:50 right now, so it gives us about 10 minutes to kind of sort out the rest of the considerations here. So we'll take a look at those. Obviously, at any time, anything to add to the conversation, or when we have another conversation, which will come, and we'll talk about the timing of that here shortly, we'll make sure to hit things up. Intro meetings for possible new members. I had a really good conversation with Ryan Tribbett, and I characterized this to Linda as saying if he could jump in the car and drive right over right now, he would. He's very excited and wants to be part of it. I have not heard from Aaron. I will confess I communicated with Aaron this week, and it's a little hard when you let people know in short term to spin around, especially people who are as busy as superintendents. But I did, as I said, talk with Ryan, and he wants to be part of it. I'm assuming Aaron will probably be pretty thrilled with it and the possibilities. And we can also be looking for other people to add to our group. By the time we get on the screen here, we are not huge in number, and it would be good to have more people involved. So people that you run into who seem quite plugged into and interested in CTE and CTE success, learner success, and the crosswalk with business, labor, industry, and trades. Throw them in the hat, or at least throw their names in the hat, and we'll see, because it's.
Dan, I've got a gal, she's Angie Gilbert, Meg knows her as well. She's with the Reynolds School District. She's the school to work coordinator and really active with CTE. I can put her email in the chat.
Okay. Perfect.
Dan, is Brian Robin,
She's their CTE liaison.
Okay.
has Brian Robin ever had any conversation with you about being on this committee?
He is not. Shall we put his name on the list just and check on it?
Well, I think it gives us a different perspective because he's down out of the Southern Oregon ESD. And that's another part of the state that would be pretty well supported then. He may easily tell you no, but I think also from time to time he has questions about CTE Revite.
Mm-hmm.
And so it might be good for him to see how it operates.
Like it?
Just don't tell him I suggested it.
Okay.
He'll nominate me for something.
That's how it goes.
I suspect he probably will anyway, so
Yeah. I need more.
so many fun opportunities, right?
Hmm. He knows I can't say no.
You're just a dedicated doer, Jerry. And we
No,
appreciate
I'm just easy.
Well, there's that too,
There's a
I
big
guess.
difference. There's a big difference.
Oh, let's see here. Linda has added to further guide us spring, summer intentions for current members to continue in potential next round of Revite grants. Certainly hope you can stay. We're trying to make it doable and even sometimes entertaining, and hope that you will remain part of the fun. And we also appreciate your institutional memory, your experience, and your connectedness to the work, because we need that. So we can certainly talk about that later. Current terms run through the 30th of September. And the last thing we have to do in our final 5 minutes is determine what is going to be a reasonable time to get together. And it is April. If we did June, we would be right there at the end of the current grant cycle, and we would have pretty much a front row seat to everything that's going on. And you would, in fact, truly be in the room where it happened.
Ooh, let's do that.
I
love
agree with
your
Meg.
enthusiasm, Meg.
Are we
Let's,
gonna meet in person?
well, we certainly can. We need to square away a few particulars if we do meet in person, because there's some additional paperwork that we need to do, or a lot, depending, remember, we're the state. So paperwork that needs to be handled and provisions that need to be made for in-person meetings.
I can be
But
in the virtual
not-
room where it happens.
if we, I like seeing all y'all in person personally, but
It's not
I'm not supposed to
necessary.
weigh in. I'm not necessarily supposed to weigh in on it in that way.
Yeah.
So it would certainly be easy to, it's easy enough to do. We know how to do it. And if you would like to, then I think we could probably make that happen with a virtual option, because sometimes people just can't make it, and we understand that. You
Yeah.
should be able to participate no matter where you are.
Well, June's sort of tough. I know Tom's wrapping up school and getting things ready and graduation and all those good things. And I've got this Perkins grant to get done, so maybe it's better just not to do it in person.
Is there a part of June where things get realistic other than not in June because June's a mess?
From my standpoint as a principal, I can make somewhere in that week of June 12th through 16 work, but I wouldn't be able to do it in person. I would love to do it in person because I prefer in person anyway, but 12 through 16, if there was a day in there, I could potentially make that part work.
Okay.
And that would be more mine too, because we have OEDA in June as well. So the
Okay.
Oregon Ag teachers are meeting, and interestingly enough, they're meeting in Baker on that this year. And that's the next week, the 20th through the 20th, whatever it is. So I could make 12 through 16 work.
How would it work for the others?
Yeah, I can make that work. As long as I know far enough in advance, I can usually schedule around it. There's certain days that are easier than others, so.
Same with me.
Well,
But sooner
Same.
the better.
we've
And
had,
admittedly, I have been multitasking while we've been on the call because I had to keep things moving, but the virtual actually works out better for that reason too, so. Yeah.
yeah, and we'll we'll try to make it, well, we'll have a Zoom function. We'll probably have everyone on their devices in whatever space we're in.
Yeah.
And,
And if I
it'll
can
be
make it, yeah, if I
very
can make
similar.
in-person work, I will. So.
We're getting kind of good at this, whether or not we planned on it. It's kind of working. With that in mind, I'm wondering, we have had a habit of meeting on Wednesdays and it seems to work. Do we just want to grab the, looks like it's the 14th, which if,
Depends on if you're in person or not.
okay, is there a better,
If you're in person, it's always easier for me personally. I just speak on my behalf because coming from Eastern Oregon, it's easier for me to travel on Sunday and have a meeting on Monday instead of traveling on Tuesday to get there Wednesday and then lose basically 2 to 3 days.
okay.
Let's meet virtually. Jerry, save you some miles.
Do what now?
Let's meet virtually, save you some miles and a Sunday of volunteering your time.
That's fine. Doesn't matter. Like I said, I'll go any way you want to go.
Well,
14th looks good.
and the alternative is we can meet virtually in June and then we can target ourselves and give everybody a lot of notice so that we can do our fall meeting in person. And then that, okay, there seems to be some warmth to that. So maybe we do that and then it's a little easier for us to sort the contact time. And yeah, if we did 1 o'clock on June 14th, 1, 2, 3. Yeah, that
do
sounds
it.
like it's working. Let's do it.
Let's do it.
Oh, what?
June 14th.
14th?
Yes.
Yep.
At
1
what
to
time?
3. 1 to 3.
Perfect. Thank you. Sorry.
Oh, no apologies necessary. We wanted to get this squared away now, and we just did.
That's on Flag Day. Got it.
Yep. Excellent. So anything for the good of the order?
It was odd not seeing you at Skills.
It was odd not being there.
Yeah, I was there on Saturday to do my thing.
Next time.
There you go.
Well, all of you be well. Hope the year winds down appropriately. Thank you for your engagement and involvement. Always appreciated. Looking forward to seeing you in June. And we'll have probably some summer independent homework to work on regarding the RFA and such. But should be good. But we should be able to get things lined out in a way that will work.
I thought you were going to say summer fun, but maybe that's what you meant.
Hey, writing RFAs is always fun. Wookidokers, be well. We'll talk to you soon.
Right.
Bye,
Thank you.
everybody.
Here, bye-bye.
Bye.
See y'all.